My grandmother woke me up one morning very early, like 6 o'clock, maybe 6:30, and said that we were going down to the hospital because they were worried he was having a heart attack because his left arm and chest, I believe, were numb. I wake up, I get in the car, we go down to the hospital in Nassawattix, and Nassawattix decided they wanted to transfer him to Maryland to a better hospital. And we got up to Maryland and they ran a test, but before they could finish everything, he decided he wanted to leave. He wasn't having any of it. My grandmother had gone to the store because he like begged her to go get him cigarettes. So she went to the store to get him a pack of cigarettes, even though he was in the hospital for potentially having a heart attack. And as soon as she left, he started getting dressed. Moral of the story is we snuck out of the hospital. And when she was coming back into the parking lot from getting cigarettes, there we were waiting for her. And we got in the car and they argued for about 30 minutes of the ride home.
Kris had got around the town of Melfa and gotten 6 lawns to mow. One day he was mowing this lawn, and this boy that lived next door to this property would ride his motorbike up to the property line and start mouthing off to Kris. And by the time Kris would get off the mower to go talk to him, the boy had run into the house. So one day, Kris
jumped off of the mower, and I decided that I was just going to go to his door and bang on his door until either him or his mom came out because I had had enough of it. His mom came to the door and I told her that she needed to get her kid outside, like right now.
But she didn't seem to care, and the kid never came out, and Kris finished the lawn and then came home.
So Jordan was always listening to metal, like ever since I knew him. And when I met him, I was listening to like Green Day and like Blink 182. So my taste in music started to like integrate towards some of the metal that he was listening to. So skateboarding, that's one of those things that like, okay, so I actually ended up really enjoying skateboarding, but I started because it was kind of like what everybody else in the group was doing at the time. So I was never the best skateboarder in the group, honestly. I was probably one of the worst. Nowhere near the level that some of my friends were at. Like Jordan, he was way better than me. Bam Margera happened to be one of my favorite skateboarders to play with on the Tony Hawk games because I played all of the Tony Hawk games. So that led us to Viva La Bam and then Wild Boys, and then we found the original Jackass movie, and me and Jordan watched it in my living room on this like tiny box TV. So at this point I had quit all like organized sports, and there was several reasons for it, but one of the main reasons for it was the last season of indoor soccer. Every year we would win all of the games through the whole championship like series and everything, and then the last game we would play this team Red Storm and they would destroy us. And I was always the goalie. The last season that I played, we were halfway through the season. And so I asked the coach if I could be pulled from goalie and play like defense or something else for the second half of the game. And he told me that if we were up by 4 points, that I could come out of goalie and we would switch up. Well, we were up by 5 points actually, and the time came and he wouldn't let me switch. So initially I was ready to just quit, like just walk out, but I decided I didn't want to do that to the rest of the team. And so I stayed and I figured I would finish that season off. The final straw was the last game. We're going to go play the Red Storm. And the coach tells me that I need to make sure that they don't score this year because he would rather the game end in a 0-0 tie than us lose again. I don't know. I just was like, okay, we're not even playing to win anymore. Like, this is bullshit. So at this point, things were weird, okay? So I didn't know how to process things that were going on, and there was a lot of problems at the house which weren't helping anything. And yeah, it was just, it was a really weird and rough time. And so that led to not only smoking cigarettes, but now I was deciding that I wanted to try drinking. And so originally I stole one Budweiser from my grandfather from the refrigerator in the garage. And me and my friend tried to drink it, and it was disgusting. So he had some vodka that was hidden, and so I got the bottle and I poured out a little bit into a cup, like a cup's worth, and then refilled it with water. And never got caught, but that's how I started then drinking as well, starting 6th grade. So me and Jordan decided that we didn't just want to listen to metal music anymore, we wanted to play metal music. So I was so adamant on it. I was in Salisbury, Maryland with my grandmother one day, and I had all the money with me that I had saved up from mowing lawns. And I convinced her after like an hour to let me go to this little music shop and buy this guitar. So I went and spent all the money that I had saved up over the years, all of it, and bought this guitar. And when we got home, I rode my bike over to Jordan's and was like, we got to go play this guitar. And we got back to my house and we're sitting there playing with it, messing around. And then we decided that we needed to step it up and get an amp. So I took all the change that I had in this change jar that I had been saving basically my whole life. And we went to the bank and cashed it in and went to this tiny guitar shop in a Nancock called In Tune. And I bought this little amp, and we went home, and for the next 5-6 hours we made the most awful noise you could imagine because
Either one of them knew how to play a guitar.
by December of that year things at the house had gotten worse. Like, arguments were getting worse. My grandfather was basically drinking more, and so that was creating more problems. And me being that age and going through weird things, that was causing problems. For example, one day he was standing in the backyard, and I had walked to the back door and I had just looked out the back door. He gave me the finger. Obviously, he was drunk, right? So I gave him the finger back and turned around and just started walking back in the house, like, oh, well, whatever. So I make it 5 feet, and the back door swings open, and I turn around, and he's basically tackling me into the floor, tackles me into the floor, and punches me in the face, and starts yelling and screaming. My grandmother's, what the is going on? I try to tell her what happened, and she basically didn't believe me, because he said that he didn't do anything, and that I just came to the door and gave him the finger. So one night he came home drunk. You could tell that he was going to start problems because he was being mouthy right off the bat, and it was raining out that day. My grandmother had took off to the store. I don't even remember what was said. I just remember that he said something. I responded back. He got mad, started yelling. I decided I'd had enough, and I packed up all of my stuff that I could fit into this big duffel bag that I had and took off. It was raining, and I got maybe like 2 blocks, and my grandmother was coming down the street on her way home and stops and asked me what I was doing, and I told her, like, I'm not going back, blah blah blah. So she convinces me, just go home. I was like, okay, whatever. We go back to the house. He started saying something. I just ignored it, went up to my room. I locked my door and got on the computer and got on AOL Messenger and talked to some people for a few hours. The next day, it was probably 8:30 in the morning. My grandmother comes in the room and she's like, let's go wake up your grandfather. I just get up and go with her. We go into the bedroom, And instantly I was like, okay, something's wrong. She goes over to him and's like, wake up, wake up. And he doesn't respond whatsoever. And you can tell at this point that, like, there's no color, like, at all in his face. At this point, my grandmother starts screaming and she's like shaking him. I told her, like, to stop basically because it was pointless. I went downstairs, got the, like, little house phone that we had, and I called 911. And I'm on the phone coming back up the stairs with the 911 operator. I'm telling her, like, he's dead and they need to send somebody, but she's arguing with me that we need to do CPR and to move him from the bed to the ground. And so I tell my grandmother what they're saying, and so she's like screaming at me now to help her move him to the floor so she can give him CPR. I help her move him to the floor. She goes to start giving him CPR, but by this point, there's literally blood coming out of his mouth, and he's cold, and I'm telling her to just stop. I was like, you know what, it. And I hung up the phone with the 911 operator and basically made my grandmother leave the room and come downstairs. So, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes later, an ambulance finally shows up. The EMTs rush in the house, completely ignore what I'm saying, rush in there trying to save him. And then within, I don't know, a minute, they were back downstairs. There was an EMT who had my grandmother in the back room. She had sat down on this chair and hadn't moved probably in about 20 minutes at this point now. When I noticed that the EMTs were like all around her at this point, I took that time to leave and go to Jordan's house and get Jordan. So Jordan comes back with me. There is an EMT telling me that I'm not allowed basically in the house and that somebody's on the way to come get me. Zach's parents came, got me, went to Nancock to their house for all of 2 hours before Zach's dad decided that he didn't want company at their house. So I had to go back home at this point. I got pulled out of school because obviously there was going to be a bunch of stuff happening. His family came from Massachusetts for the first time that I can ever remember in my life, at least. So then we go to the service. We have the service. Then we left from the service, went home, and had to go the next day out to Richmond to my grandmother's brother's house because we were having the actual like funeral in Arlington because that's where he wanted to be buried, was in Arlington. So we were out there, I don't know, for a week, maybe a week and a half. And while we were out there, I had, after having permission, downloaded AOL Instant Messenger onto my grandmother's brother's computer after getting permission. And so I downloaded it and used it while we were there. And then we went to the funeral. The funeral was, a funeral. And on the way home, on the way back to my grandmother's brother's house from the funeral, we almost got in a car accident and died. So that was pretty cool. And then we got back the next day, we left. And as soon as we got home, my grandmother gets a phone call about how he was angry that he couldn't figure out how to delete AOL off of his computer. And so because I didn't delete it, I was never allowed to touch anything if we ever visited again.